Damien Leone found some legs with Art the Clown in All Hallows Eve, an anthology horror movie that released in 2013 which contained two of Leone's previous short films with Art, who also turned out to be the antagonist in the wraparound segments. The movie wasn't a hit or anything, but it was enough to make way for Leone's first ever full-length feature film focusing entirely on the charismatic killer. Terrifier released in 2018 and gained a fair amount of infamy for the extreme levels of violence and the distinct antagonist in Art the Clown, now wonderfully portrayed by David Howard Thornton. Good evening. My name's Evan and welcome to Rocklin Graves. We're about 5 months out from the release of Terrifier 3, which I just can't wait to hopefully see in the theater. Terrifier 2 didn't initially release in theaters around me, but I caught the re-release and it was awesome, so I'm hoping to get the proper cinematic experience for the third one. Anyway, we've still got a ways to go, but we're smoothing out the wait a little bit. I've covered both All Hallows Eve movies, the first one because Art the Clown is in it, and the second for the sake of completion, but now I'm really excited to be taking a look at the first ever feature-length Art the Clown Murder Fest. In 2015, Damien Leone went to Indiegogo to finance this movie through crowdfunding. He got pretty lucky when Phil Falcone saw the campaign and provided the funds for the movie, landing him a producer credit and bringing him and Leone together. Falcone has been involved with the ever-growing franchise since then, both financially and creatively. With a budget of $35,000 to work with, Leone wrote, directed, edited, and handled all of the practical makeup effects for this passion project. Regardless of how you feel about the man's movies, you have to have respect for how insanely dedicated he is to bringing these things to life. The workload that he takes on to make the Terrifier movies happen is incredible and goes to show how deeply passionate he is about the craft of filmmaking. I have a ton of respect for Leone as a creative. Mike Gianelli, who portrayed Art the Clown in All Hallows Eve, opted not to return for Terrifier because he wasn't interested in further pursuing acting as a career. It's a shame that it wasn't jiving well with him because he did a pretty decent job in All Hallows Eve, but it also meant that the role had opened up and the stars aligned when David Howard Thornton auditioned by miming out a kill scene and landed the role. What a blessing, because while Art has a great visual design and his characteristics are written super well, Thornton's performance really is the beating heart of Terrifier and is arguably the biggest reason the franchise has been able to go from niche throwback grindhouse slasher to modern day horror icon. Terrifier 2 was really the thing that propelled this franchise, but let's start by taking a look at what's essentially a proof of concept film for Art the Clown as a lead antagonist. Before that though, I want to thank my wonderful Patreon supporters and YouTube channel members. These videos take a lot of time and energy to make, and the extra support really helps to keep things moving. If you're interested in getting some bonus material and accessing private supporter-only polls or getting early access to the big videos, consider supporting me on either platform.
Hello? Hello?
The film opens showing a talk show interview with a woman who survived what's being called the Miles County Massacre. Her Tinder profile may need a touch-up or two, but she's doing all right, all things considered.
Yeah, well, if you think she looks that bad on television, imagine what she looks like sitting 2 feet away from you.
Yeah, well, people do deal with trauma in different ways. The interviewer, Monica Brown, is played by Katie McGuire, who you'll recognize if you've seen All Hallows Eve because she played the babysitter in that movie. Well, its sequel introduced a bunch of lore that's still yet to be fully unraveled. It's in fact still quite raveled, if I dare say so myself. Like, holy hell, we've got some questions that need answering. The first Terrifier film is an extremely simple, stripped back, and in a lot of ways shallow slasher film. We're gonna get into all of this, of course, but one thing I'll throw this movie's way right off the bat is the very grimy, uncanny tone that it achieves. The movie gets a lot of criticism for looking and feeling very cheap, which it definitely does, but that's also something that Leone leans into out of his love for old school, low budget grindhouse slashers. You can go back and forth about how many of these elements were intentional as a creative decision for the tone he was trying to achieve or just a byproduct of the film's budget, but the result is that Terrifier feels like a creepy VHS tape you'd find in the back of a video store, and if you lean into that vibe, it can actually work really well. I just can't help but have a big grin stretch across my face when the title card comes up. It's so cozy. There's an oddly nostalgic feel to it, and I find it really charming. Does this mean that I'm saying that all of the technical side of this movie was purely a creative decision? No. We can see by looking at what happens when Leone has more money to work with that he's clearly capable of achieving a much more polished look, but There's also a lot that we can point to show that he does like to lean into this sort of aesthetic. It's also worth pointing out that Leone was shooting this movie between shifts at part-time jobs, and they were very limited on time. A lot of it is overexposed, and the way the editing is paced can sometimes be really awkward, but again, and this doesn't excuse any of these issues, there's something that I find charming about how that aesthetic is emphasized and fully embraced here. Terrifier is a dirty, grimy, and gross movie, and having this sickly look to the presentation feels very much like it goes hand in hand with the movie. One thing that goes a long way in making this vibe work is the score from Paul Wiley, composer of the score for both Terrifier films. It's very much styled to be a throwback to 80s slashers, and it works really well. There's an awesome blend here of piano with distorted synths, and while it may not be the most original or unique score out there, some of the motifs in the music are just really damn good and service the movie's approach wonderfully. I think the main theme is particularly enjoyable, and I can almost smell the fall air when I hear it. Similar to what I said at the end of my video for All Hallows Eve, this campy, nostalgic Halloween tone is something that you're either gonna click with or it's just not gonna do anything for you, and I think your enjoyment of these two movies hinges on your reaction to that. So what of the story in Terrifier? Well, Dawn and Tara get attacked by Art the Clown on Halloween night. All right, yeah, there's that section done with. Yeah, this is the thing with Terrifier, and it's the biggest reason that I think I prefer the original short film overall. The idea behind this movie was that Leone was setting out to make a sizzle reel for Art the Clown that would hopefully enable him to create a more full-fledged movie around this great antagonist he'd been nurturing for so long. Set Art loose on Halloween night, let Thornton go crazy with the performance, get some insane kills in there to show off the balls-to-the-wall, unhinged approach to the violence, and then say picture wrapped. And it worked. We did get that more fleshed out movie with Terrifier 2, but this first one basically has nothing to offer beyond Art the Clown and the crazy kill sequences. Now for some people, that's gonna work because that's all they want, but if gore in and of itself doesn't hold your attention for the runtime of a whole movie, then this can drag. There really isn't anything that actually happens. It's just Dawn and Tara out drunk on Halloween night. They bump into Art the Clown and get fucked up before Tara's sister Victoria shows up because all the other characters got killed off. And for a while, it does work for me. I always enjoy the first act of Terrifier because the non-existent narrative hasn't gone on long enough yet to dull my senses away from enjoying the creepy low-rent vibe and Art being Art. His antics are entertaining and the schlocky dialogue is morbidly funny in a way that makes this section of the movie a damn good time, but it's really once they get to the old rundown building that it feels like the premise starts running out of gas, especially once you realize that there is absolutely nothing actually going on outside of the murders. The second movie is a lot longer, but I've always found that this one feels like a far slower and less engaging movie, which is just because it's ultimately a very thin film. I suppose if we want to try and look at any story-related things, we do get the weird basement-dwelling woman with the doll baby, and I have absolutely no idea what the hell is going on there. She's a really random addition that doesn't go anywhere and just winds up being another victim for Art, so even the things that feel like they might turn into story elements really don't. Now don't get your knickers in a knot here, I'm getting to all the shit you came for in a second. At the end of the day, this is nothing more than a showcase of Art the Clown. So was it an effective one? I mean, objectively, yes, this was successful in what it set out to do because we saw the huge success in the crowdfunding campaign in the sequel, and this definitely took Art out of being underground and into the eye of more people. Even if not everyone who saw him knew what movie he was from, a lot more people recognized Art from one spot or another after this movie came out. So it was absolutely successful in demonstrating this kooky dude, but how is it actually sitting down and watching Terrifier? The actual experience of watching the movie is a pretty mixed bag in all honesty, and keep in mind, this is coming from someone who has the Art Crispy cereal box in the background of every video. In my opinion, Art the Clown is far and away the best slasher villain to be introduced in a very, very long time. I genuinely don't think we've had a new slasher villain pop up and become this iconic since the 80s. The thing that really makes him stand out is that, well, yes, his kills are obviously super over the top and incredibly brutal. It's the charisma of the character that I find makes him so ridiculously entertaining. Sam should have gotten more love than he did, by the way. That dude, He should have been iconic. We need more Trick or Treat. I need more Sam. A lot of what I love about Terrifier has absolutely nothing to do with Art killing people, but instead the scenes of him just fucking around and being goofy beforehand. David Howard Thornton is a trained mime, and he makes beautiful use of his experience with such an expressive, comical performance. It gives so much more life to Art the Clown than you see in a lot of slashers. It's this kind of thing that's the reason I get bothered when people say these movies are nothing more than gore simulators. And while that's more true for this first movie, I still think that it sells short just how fun Art is as a killer when he's not killing. I was glad to see more of an emphasis on this sort of thing in the sequel, but it's definitely still present here. My favorite scene of the whole movie is when Art is sitting across from Tara and Dawn at the diner and just toying with Tara in such a creepily playful way. Tara's played by Jenna Cannell, and she's a nice contrast to Dawn because Dawn is...
That was the longest piss I've ever taken.
Well, she's absolutely oblivious the entire time, but I just can't help but laugh when she goes to take a picture with Art and he looks so thoroughly displeased, like a child being forced to pose for a family photo. Look at how his eyes dart around here. I love this. He's like, is she fucking serious? It's not until a little later on when he's more in his element that he seems happier being in front of the camera. The characters in this movie are unbelievably stupid and really only serve as a canvas for Art to show what he's got later on. It's these moments earlier in Terrifier where it just focuses on letting him goof around and toy with the people that it's at its best. And well, it's definitely true that the notoriety this movie gained is thanks to Dawn's death scene. I don't think that it would have stuck around nearly as much as it has if it weren't for how great Art the Clown is. There's some people who say that Art is only popular because of the gore, and I hate that. It definitely plays a part, but there are plenty of ultra gory movies that have faded away into obscurity because they didn't have anything to give staying power beyond the extreme levels of violence. Art the Clown is brutal and he's creepy, but he's also really funny and super entertaining, and that's what makes him special. The inspiration behind him was to fill in a blank spot in slasher villains that Leone used to think about, that being a silent Freddy Krueger, and I think he pretty much nailed that. Horror's got no shortage of clowns, and it's got no shortage of slasher villains either, and making one of either of those things that manages to stand out and feel fresh and justified in its existence is no easy task, let alone creating a character that's both of those things and can still stand on his own. Here's the issue though. Because the movie basically doesn't have a story or characters to give Art the Clown the necessary context or a proper adversary, after a while, it becomes more and more difficult to appreciate just how good Art is because of how empty the overall package feels. Moments like when Art, you're gonna have to bear with me for a moment here, skins the doll lady's chesticles and wears them along with her scalp are super messed up, and there are some very creepy images that come along with it, but by this point in the movie, I'm just so disengaged with what's going on that it doesn't have much of an impact on me. It doesn't feel like there are any stakes in this story or progressions to keep things interesting, so even when I can tell that Art is doing something that should be making me feel something, it just doesn't because my eyes have already glossed over. It feels like there was a bit of an attempt to pull a Psycho by killing off Tara, who we think is going to be the final girl of the movie, so when Victoria shows up, you're expecting that she's going to have some big showdown with Art, but she's really nothing more than another body to extend the mayhem we've been watching and doesn't put up much of a fight at all. Now, obviously, she has become a much more important character since then, but it doesn't change that her inclusion in this first movie feels very tacked on and awkward. Alright, so let's see. We've talked about the aesthetic, we've gone over the characters and the story as best I can. Scores covered. Art the Clown's charisma, that's all good. I feel like I'm missing some. Oh yeah, the cooch to smooch sliceage. Silly old me. It's impossible to talk about Terrifier without getting into the ridiculously over-the-top gore that makes these things way too extreme for a lot of people to handle. All Hallows Eve was gory, but it was nowhere near as far as Leone decided to push things with Terrifier. Leone handled all of the practical effects himself, and considering the budget he was working on, the effects on display here are crazy impressive. His background in this sort of work shines through, and while the effects don't always look amazing, the highlights are what really sell the whole thing. Just a shame I can't really show you any of it, because this video would get demonetized quicker than my Halloween Ends video got copyright claimed. I didn't really care when I first put that video out because this was just a hobby then, but god damn it, this is frustrating now. I put a lot of work into that video, man. I give a positive Halloween Ends review and they still fuck me over. Anywho, well, I love watching Art the Clown play around and act like a little jackass. The way he dishes out deaths in these movies is the source of some of the most brutal kills you can find in the genre. It's not just that they pump more blood through the blood tubes than other movies, although they do that. Art the Clown likes to get creative with his kills. Routine can be boring, you know? There are some more normal ones, like stabbing a dude in the face a bunch of times or sawing a guy's head off, the huge. But then, yeah, there's really one scene in this movie that was the thing that propelled its infamy, and that's Dawn's death, and it's been colloquially titled the very simple hacksaw kill from Terrifier, but that doesn't even come close to encapsulating what Art does to this poor woman. There are lots of ways to kill someone with a hacksaw. Well, I'm not gonna whip out my list because that's only for patrons. One thing that had never occurred to me is to hang someone upside down, buck-ass naked, and saw from their crotch through the vast majority of their body. But the man's name is Art after all, and he's got some ideas floating around up there, and that horrific death is exactly what happens to Dawn. Shooting this scene was rough, as they were filming in an actual basement that was very cold and used real animal organs, so after a while the smell and temperature was just beating up everyone on set. David Howard Thornton himself had a fair bit of trouble with it, but the obvious MVP of this whole thing is Catherine Corcoran, because she didn't even have any clothes on when filming and was hanging upside down. Serious props to this woman. I can imagine doing nude scenes in general is probably pretty intimidating, but to do it in a cold and dingy basement while hanging upside down and having fake blood poured on you that must have only made it colder is a whole other level of commitment. Serious respect to everyone involved with this, but especially so to Catherine. Terrifier is really gory the whole way through, but it's this scene that took it from a gory slasher to the infamous splatterfest it's become, and the kill has become iconic in and of itself. The practical effects, while really impressive, aren't the most realistic looking, not that I would know. They look pretty rubbery, but when what's happening is this insane, you might not even notice that, and especially considering the budget they were working with, this is really impressive. I will say though, and this is a really weird line that I'm drawing that may not make sense to anyone else, there's something about the characters being restrained that makes this feel especially icky, and not really in the fun movie way. It feels odd for me to say that the thing that makes me most uncomfortable in a scene of someone being sawed from the birth canal to the word canal is that they're restrained while it happens, but I'm saying that. The torture porn genre really isn't my thing, and I think that the most obvious distinction I can make between torture porn and insanely gory slasher movie is the characters being restrained in some fashion. Maybe if this was in a carnival context, it might ick me out less, but in a gross and dingy basement, it feels so dirty and uncomfortable, pushing more into the exploitation genre than a slasher to me, which isn't something that I usually gravitate towards. All right, moving on to, yeah, the end of the movie. I guess we basically covered it all. So up to this point, there's really no hint of Art being supernatural. The movie opens with him putting on makeup, and we see that he looks like a normal dude. Is that the right word for that? And, well, he's eccentric, we'll say. There's no hint that he isn't just a fucked up guy until the literal last moment of Art in the movie, where the cops arrive to find him munching on Victoria's face, and then he shoots himself, and when he's at the morgue, he wakes up and the lights start flickering and he kills the dude. Sort of. That's the opening scene to Terrifier 2. Obviously, we know now that Art's supernatural, but it feels really out of left field in this first movie. Then we've got what's played off as a big reveal for the last scene of the movie, where a Play-Doh'd Victoria is revealed to be the woman being interviewed at the start of the movie, but like, yeah, I kind of figured that. So that's Terrifier. It's a pretty wild slasher movie that was the birthplace of a killer who's quickly becoming iconic, and, well, spoilers for some of the conclusions of my Terrifier 2 video, it spawned one of my all-time favorite slasher films and villains and final girls, so I have a ton of appreciation for it from that perspective. That being said, every time I put this movie on after not seeing it for a while, I always find myself like drifting away and having a hard time focusing because there just isn't much going on. Sure, it's shocking to watch it the first time, but once you know what's coming, the shock value is kind of worn off a little bit, and then there's just not much else to offer. It's a cool showcase of some of the potential of the character of Art, but there's so little else to keep my attention, and I honestly kind of find it boring after a while. I prefer the original Terrifier short film overall, except for the portrayal of Art the Clown, because it's a tighter and shorter experience that feels like it's paced in a way that does the complete focus on Art more justice than a feature-length film does. There's also a really creepy tone to that original short that I just love, and the setting is more my speed. I like All Hallows Eve more, if I'm being totally honest, but as for Terrifier 2, well, we'll get to that down the line. Until then, thank you for stopping by Rocklin Graves. I hope you've enjoyed your stay.